Good afternoon, everybody. Can everybody hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
I'm just looking down the present list. See if we would appear to be correct. We got James with us.
Not yet by the looks of it.
I think he said he was rushing to get back, so he should be with us any minute if he's not already.
Thanks, man. Is everybody okay if we just wait for a moment or two before James arrives? He's here. There we go. Hi, James. Welcome. Right. In that case, I think we've got everybody that we are anticipating. So, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to School Forum. We have a couple of new visitors. I'm just take that. Moira, are you okay? Can you use your reactions to say whether you can hear us? Can you hear us if your camera isn't working? Yeah, brilliant. So I'm looking at, we have two observers from the local authority, from the council. So you're more than welcome. And if you've got any questions, please feel free to put your hands up to ask any questions. I remind everybody that this is a public meeting, so we can communicate either through the chat box or by putting your hand up to signal that you want to ask a question. And for your information, this is being recorded. Okay. Thank you, John. I acknowledge that this is being live broadcast also. Okay, in which case, if we're ready, if we can refer to the agenda. So, as I say, you're welcome. If we can start by having a look at the minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of January, and we'll go through those a section at a time. Any issues with the attendance?
No issues with the attendance.
Thank you.
Attendance. Apologies. We've got two apologies. We've got Mr. Goodwin, Simon Goodwin, and Mark Bellamy.
Okay. Thank you very much, Robin. So sorry, that was for this meeting. I should have asked for apologies. I do apologise for that. If we can now go to the minutes of the previous meeting. So this is item 2. Everything okay with the attendance of that meeting? Anything on item 2, 3, 4? Anything from item 4? No. Anything on the energy update? I'm presuming that at some stage early next year, we're going to have to revisit the energy update because there's been a significant change in energy costs again. So we probably need to have a look at that. Anything on the school library survey? Oh, James.
Yeah, just in relation to energy update, we wouldn't normally have one from the service until January, but if forum members think it prudent, we can ask for an update in September.
I'm just conscious that it's quite a volatile market. We've issues with budget setting, it would appear, across the sector. If we get any early indication of what energy is going to do, it might be useful either in the September or the late autumn meeting. Sue?
Just a quick note, really. At that meeting, he suggested that we should be estimating 63% for electricity and 103% increase for gas. We have found that the electricity is coming in round about that, but the gas is coming in significantly less than 103%. I haven't worked out an exact percentage, but it's definitely far less than what was originally predicted, and we are adjusting budgets downwards as we're doing budget setting.
Yeah, so with changes of this volatility, I think getting an update in an interim update rather than an annual update might be quite useful, because if schools are setting budgets based on that, we're tying up a lot of revenue funding, holding back for bills that may not be there. So I think if we could have an update sometime in the autumn, that would be useful.
I'll action that, Chair.
Thank you, James. Okay, if we move on to item 6, anything from the school library service? No, that's okay. Schools forum membership is on again today, so we'll come to that if we can then. Anything from the budget forecast, item 8? Delegation, item 9. James, oh sorry, Sean, you've got your hand up there.
Yeah, just on item 9, I think on resolutions 2, 4 and 5, they all say the same value, £347,000 for primary, secondary and special schools. I'm not sure that's right. I think that might be the value for the primary, but not secondary or special.
They are the values as a combined contribution from the system. I think from my recollection, the bit that we needed an update from last forum was that the special school reps wanted to go away and have a discussion with special school head teachers, to which they did. And we did receive confirmation via email that they were satisfied with the 23,000. So I think it's just need to make their amendments that I can pick up with the ZACO, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, it's just the actual minutes for the ESG delegation. I think the total in total was 500,000. So I think it's just the secondary and special school may need to just update in the current minutes.
Okay, can we note that and check that for factual accuracy? And just to confirm, as James said, we've received an email from the special schools about the grant, the
school improvement monitoring brokerage grant.
Yeah. Okay. Anything more on that? No. Fab. Okay. If we move on to budget variations, anything on that from anybody? Anything? No. And work plan was noted. Item 12, schools block allocation. Option A, okay. Okay, so can we accept that they're a true record? Can I have somebody to indicate that they agree that that's a true record? Please, so we adopt the minutes? Yeah, thank you. I've got Sean and Lisa. Thank you for that. Okay, so if we can move now to agenda item 4, which is Trish Lewis. Okay, Trish?
Good evening, everybody. I'll share my screen and talk you quickly through Wirral Virtual Schools financial report. I'm hoping that screen is shared now.
Yeah, it is.
Go right to the top. Excuse me if I do get interrupted. I'm working from home and there are a couple of dogs sitting here who are waiting to go out. So this is LACE's LAP Pupil Premium financial year 2023 to 2024. No, it is. It's for the current financial year we're in now. Wirral Virtual School is made up of 10 people now, or 10 and a bit. We've got a growing team that has recently included a data analyst on a part-time basis, which is really helpful in allowing us to understand all our information relating to not just looked after but child protection children in need and any children open to social care. This sheet is telling you how the team is made up. My role is a statutory role. And there is different funding streams that come in to support a lot of these roles here. A lot of them are grant funded. The role of the virtual school has been extended twice recently, one for responsibilities for previously looked after children and another for children open to social care. So those grants have allowed us to increase capacity in the team to enable us to provide support to schools and social care across the authority and beyond. There's a high cost to the team, as you can see, but it does come from different places. There's not a high council cost to the team. The main form of income is Pupil Premium Plus. And I'm sorry if I'm being patronising to everybody, but Pupil Premium Plus is an additional funding stream that comes from the government to enable children who are looked after to close the education gap that so frequently exists because of trauma and neglect in early life. Pupil Premium Plus comes for every looked after child who's been in care. Now, if Andrew's here, I think it's March to March, isn't it, James? The 903s, I think it's March to March. They have to have been in care for 12 months or any day during that year. The current amount for this financial year per child is £2,530. £2,100 of that goes directly into school based on what they evidence in a personal education plan. £430 of that we hold centrally in the virtual school because it allows us to provide support when it's absolutely necessary. And this is usually in the form of some additional and urgent support when the children are struggling. So this shows you how it's made up. £2,500 per child, £430 for the virtual school and £2,100 to the schools. And we send it in 2 instalments. £1,050 in the autumn term when they produce the first PEP. In the spring term, the team go out and they see how that's being used. Is it effective? If it's not, they'll ask the schools to change and use it for something that's more beneficial. If they are, they can guarantee that £1,050 coming in the summer term, which we're doing now. It's been referred to as payment by results, but it's not really. It just gives us an avenue to hold schools to account and make sure they're spending that directly in support of the educational outcomes of each child. That shows you the total allocations there. Amounts to £1.5 million going to schools and £250,000 staying with the virtual school. We do use part of that for a deputy because of the increase in the role of the virtual head for previously looked after and children open to social care. It does impact quite considerably on the time that we're spending. So having that additionality there in the form of a deputy has really strengthened the capacity in the team. She's also an ex-assistant head of a large secondary school in Liverpool, so it closes a gap there because I'm primary. This is the funding distributed to schools. Now, in the spring term, you don't usually pay any out, but if any children come into care in that term, we do. But we'll do a new to care PEP and they'll get money there. So the report on the next page will show you just how much of that money has been used, that money going to school to support the children in school and where it's used. And if you notice, the top box is TA support. That's usually how schools are using it to provide some additionality to make sure the children are supported to access the education they need to. The other growing category there is SEMH, and that is post-pandemic. And I can talk more about that in a minute because I'm involved in an emotional health and wellbeing project, but we're really seeing a lot of change there for particular cohorts of children or little children, preschool, and as Lisa will tell you, definitely girls in year 9, 10, they're really struggling with anxiety just now. So there's a breakdown there of how it was used by schools in the spring term. We get a report like this every term to show how the money is being used. Table 2 identifies what we do with the top sliced element. So this is the money that we retain. There were 629 children last financial year. We don't know till December what that number looks like, but as soon as we know, we can readjust that funding that we get. And I work with Andrew and ASSA account to make sure we do that. So it costs us £84,000 for Sarah, who's the deputy, and for 2 days of somebody else. We use a heck of a lot of money, and it does seem a lot. We've had to go up to tender to provide us with emergency teacher support, TA support and tuition for our children. it's what schools desperately need right now. And what we've done is made sure that we're guaranteed having access to that for the next 5 years. So we're going out for a mini competition to make sure we use that wisely. But it costs us around about that much a year in support for schools. We do commission places in alternative provision. We sometimes jointly fund them with schools. We sometimes have to fund them ourselves. If they go out of borough, they're not on school roll. So we tend to use a fair chunk of the money there, £50,000 for alternative provision. That is going to increase, I think, as more and more provisions become registered. So we're going to have to keep an eye on that. We do use an attendance tool called Looked After attendance collection tool. It enables us to provide an additional line of support to make sure that the most vulnerable children are safeguarded. We do provide 3 days of training. It's compulsory training. I think we go over and above in Wirral. I think it's 3 half days officially, but we tend to go for 3 days. We're thinking if we get people out of school, let's keep them. And we tie them up, make sure they stay. But that costs us £7,500. We've saved an awful lot of money recently because of the data analyst. We used to pay for every child in and out of borough to make sure all the attendance data was in one place, but we don't have to now. Dave extracts it from Capita and dovetails it with Looked After Call, so it's all in one place. So Dave has actually saved us a lot of money, but please don't tell James that. We do also, because a lot of our children go through the EACP application, the shortage of educational psychologists means drift and delay, and we can't have that for our children. So we went out and we found a couple of EPs who could work for us on a commission basis. So if we've got a looked after child in Wirral schools or beyond actually that are in need of an EP report to support their education healthcare plan, we'll jump in and do that. We've found it's really successful because we are reducing the number of children who are waiting for an education healthcare plan, and it also increases the capacity for the SEND team. So it's a double-edged sword. We also commission this company here, and for schools that have used them so far, they're having real good effect. They use a really unusual support mechanism for children who are struggling to regulate behaviour. And what we've found so far is schools are really appreciating that. So we've put some money aside to make sure that we can continue that. But if you look here, there's a big concern. Based on what we get in, we're currently overspending in this area, and that's for 2 reasons. Due to the increase in children struggling with anxiety and the need for alternative education places. But we are aware of that, and we have made changes to how we're commissioning and how we're using our money, and really we're just tightening our belts as we're going forward to make sure we're aware of a possible underspend there and we mitigate against it. James?
Made that clear to Schools Forum members that overspend, if needed for this year, will be met by education reserves in the council. It's not coming from DSG. Sorry, Trish.
Yeah, it's okay. There are other streams of funding that do come in. The government put in post-COVID recovery premium funding. It was difficult to utilise initially, as school colleagues will say, because there was a shortage of tutors available. And in the last financial year, we had to be slightly creative how we use that because the advice changed term to term. Both that and school-led tutoring, the advice was changing on a regular basis. But going forward for this year, we've put in the PEPs a section for schools to claim this, and we encourage them to utilise every piece of funding that they've got. So in the PEP for each looked after child now, there's a section of, are you applying for recovery funding? What are you going to use it for? Just so we can evidence where it's been. And we've also made sure that Power BI is able to run reports to be able to evidence how that's been utilised. School-led tuition, or National Tutoring Programme it's called now, is another funding stream that comes in quite high amounts there. If you look at the virtual school, again, it's difficult to use. It funds 60% of the £18 unit cost for an hour's tuition, which equates to £12.50. However, we have sent concrete examples out to how schools can utilise this funding in small group tuition with one teacher to be able to utilise it. The take-up, again, hasn't been remarkable because schools have their own NTP that's coming in as well, and they're utilising that in that way. So it's difficult then because our looked after children are usually included in those small groups. More advice and guidance will come out about NTP during the summer term, and we'll be able to evidence how we've used it, and we have to do an end of academic year statement that we complete during summer term as well. So we have to be really careful and closely monitor how we're using both of those funding streams. We have Section 31 grant funding that comes in, and it's for the additional, the extension to the roles of the virtual schools. The first one is for post-16 education. Most of this went to our main provider this year, Wirral Met, to support with mentors for our looked after children, to make sure those who arrived in year 12 stayed in year 12 and progressed to year 13. I'm meeting with Lorraine Jones next week to see how that's gone and formulate our plan for going forward. That's one stream. The children with a social worker funded stream brings in 100,000 a year. It does fund staff because we need that additional capacity within the staff to release some of us to have that more strategic overview of where we're going. Previously looked after, again, funds a member of staff, and this is for responsibilities for adopted children or those who are on special guardianship order. And it's for advice and guidance only. We're not responsible for the cohort of children, but we do get involved on a child basis. I'm going to a meeting tonight that runs till 9:30. And it's with Adoption in Merseyside, because they tend to get all the virtual heads from Liverpool City region together, and we tend to attend these meetings on a rota basis to just support our adoptive parents that are out there. And that's the end of the report, apart from any questions.
Thanks, Trish. I just noticed that the report that you shared on the screen, that there's some slight differences to the one that's in with the agenda and notes. Could you possibly share that full report with the group, because there was additional bits of detail in your report on the screen that weren't with us? Is that okay?
Is that the one you've got, James?
Yeah, I was going to pick that up as a refinement, Chair. I think there was a slight difference between versions, so I'll make sure that the content in Trish's is transferred over to in the minutes, and you get a version of that. Is that okay, Chair?
Yeah, and can we make sure that goes right round to the
Will it be shared with full forum membership?
Fantastic. James, you have a question?
It was just to say, one of the big things that we are trying to support as best as possible around our looked after children is where we may need to meet the needs, where they may need to access alternative provision. And that is sometimes a challenge, Trish, isn't it, on Wirral? And hopefully moving forward, some of the unregistered provision will be registered from September. So we're quite excited about some of the things that are coming on stream to meet the needs of young people that are looked after in the next academic year, that will hopefully take some of the pressure off where sometimes we have challenges in place in young people. Is that okay?
Indeed. And is it the intention that if that deficit grows, that the local authority will continue to fund that out of reserves, or are there plans in place to stop that deficit recurring?
It'll have to be reviewed annually within the council's budget constraints. Obviously, this is a prediction based on budget for the financial year ahead. As Trish said, sometimes there can be changes through the year, so there could be an overspend. We've said if it does overspend to that amount, we will meet the shortfall, because the imperative is that we support our young people that are looked after. But myself and Trish and finance are going to do further work this year to try and get the virtual school working within its budget envelope. But we felt, given where we are, recovery from COVID, but also around the challenges we face in our school system, around some of the challenges young people need support with, we wanted to make sure that what we needed was in place for this academic year. So we'll move that forward, but there'll be constant refinement, but we will have to try to find a way to get back in with our budget envelope as we move forward.
The figures do change, as James said, Adrian, the figures do change because we'll find the predicted number usually changes. It can go up, it can go down. So we do have to keep our eye on that horizon, but we don't always pay Pupil Premium Plus. There may be occasions where a child is out of education for no fault of their own at that point, and despite our best efforts at that point, they might be out of education, so there's nowhere for that to go. So we do work closely to regulate this on a timely basis about where's our spend up to, what do we know our numbers are up to, and we get financial reports every month that show us where things are up to, and Andrew and Asako are readily available to support whenever we ask.
Okay, I just had a note on the chat there. So that'll be something can be picked up outside of the meeting. I think that is a conversation.
I'll pick that up, Chair, with Councillor Powell-Wild outside of the surrounding briefing for members in relation to the virtual school.
Yeah, excellent. The national picture is that the number of children in care is increasing. Is that true? So is it likely to be that that budget will be under
Simone will
increased
know
pressure?
better because ours is decreasing, but Simone's there.
Oh,
Absolutely. The national picture is that the number of children in care is increasing year on year. In fact, the prediction was if we continued at this rate, we would go from around 80,000 to 100,000 in care nationally. Against that background, I have to say that Wirral's number of children in care is actually decreasing slightly over time. And the reason for that is that actually in 2016, 2017, when we had services in Wirral that had failed children for quite some time, we took a lot of additional children into care because they hadn't had the support they needed early enough. And because of that, our numbers of children in care were inflated. Now, our numbers coming in all the time are in line with what we'd expect with the national average. And as those additional children go out, our numbers are coming down. But as I say, it looks as though we're significantly bucking the national trend, but it's around those additional children. And it's also around a lot of hard work we've been doing around early help services to try and support our children earlier when there is a risk of them coming in to care. So at the moment, it's balanced, but we do keep an eye on it all the time, particularly with the pressures on families.
Okay, it's a mixed news there, isn't it? But it's good that we're booking the national trend. Okay, any more questions for Trish on that? Excellent. Trish, thank you very much for that report. Very informative, and thank you for sharing
Can I
those
just
links.
ask whether I go or stay at this point? I'm not sure.
The normal etiquette is that once you've presented, you may leave.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'll bid you all a good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you stop sharing your screen as well so we
Yeah.
can? That'd be great.
Bye.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Trish. Okay, if we move now on to item 5, which is the home and continuing education system, and this is Julie. Julie, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me, everyone. I hope everyone's managing to stay cool. It's certainly a scorcher out there. Today is just an update from the Home and Continuing Education Services. There's no financial changes to note, so it's just a hello and a quick descriptor of where things are at for us. We're still very busy meeting families and children whose lives have been affected. The pathways have been affected by the pandemic, and numbers remain high. The report is in your pack from us. It's just a reminder we're an alternative provision, and we work alongside the other alternative provisions, and we're working very hard as we go forward, looking at the new improvement plan for that. The main difference in our alternative provision is that we are for the children whose main barrier to school are their health needs. Predominantly, they remain social, emotional, and mental health needs, although we do have some children battling with some physical barriers to coming to school. The children stay on roll at their schools, so that we are an intervention, not a destination, and we work alongside other agencies to try to get the children to get back to school, or if they come to us in the latter couple of years, which they often do, into a good post-16 provision. So that's what we try and do. We're an on-site, a sub-site for Joseph Paxton's exam centre. So we have the pleasure of being in the middle of GCSEs at the moment. Poor children always seem to get the hot weather, don't they? So we've been taking ice lollies round to everybody on their way out of exams today. In terms of background and numbers, we have, it says in the report, we had just under 100 children. Since then, we've taken on 7 and we're just over 100. And that seems to be what we're getting to the last 3 years this time of year. Obviously, in September, the year 11s will leave and we'll go back down to about 80. But that seems to be what the numbers are settling at. In terms of staffing, we've got 18 teachers. Not all of them are full-time. We've got 2 learning mentors, and having the learning mentors has allowed us to have more children come in and have out of their homes and having lessons at Pilgrim Street, which we find is a much better way of making sure that they don't get too isolated in the homes and giving the families an opportunity really to have a normal school day where we can. So we have 2 learning mentors and a higher level teaching assistant. We have a therapy dog and myself. I am the interim head of the service, and I will be interim head until September 2024, when there's a planned amalgamation with Joseph Paxton Centre. I also act as the SENCO because obviously there's an overlap between the children who have SEMH and those who have SEN. In terms of what happens at the base, the children all have an individual timetable, and it can ebb and flow, as it were, as their health needs allow. So should they be buoyant, they'll come in, maybe work alongside other young people, have some opportunities for some social interaction. And then if they become unfortunately poorlier, they can go back and have some of the lessons in the home. And that flexibility is, we find, the most effective in moving things forward, because we can change things as needed. We have about 2/3 of the children coming in at the moment. So of the 100, we do see a lot of them, which is absolutely lovely. They come along often very nervous, very anxious, and we do see them grow in confidence while they're with us. And that's when we start to work with the schools to try to get them back in a small way or in a large way. A lot of the children join us in year 9 and year 10, and then I would echo Trisha's comments there. We are seeing younger children as a direct result of this, these increasing anxieties and this emotionally based school avoidance that is becoming a real challenge for us all. One thing I did want to mention is that 2 years ago, 18 months ago, the Pupil Premium, it was agreed for the Pupil Premium to come over to the service whilst the children are with us. And we've been using that for enrichment activities to give them a social opportunity. So they're not always meeting in groups to do work. So we've taken them on the ferry, we've been to Barnstondale, I think we're going to the beach, we've got barbecues, that type of thing that gives them that opportunity and the confidence to be around other young people that they're going to need to get them back to school. So that Pupil Premium is being used for that, and it's been really effective. I think we have in upwards of about 20 children that dip in and out of the Wednesday afternoon trips. So that's been a real success, and I'm grateful for the schools. Obviously, when the children go back to the schools, the Pupil Premium follows the child. That's the background. In terms of eligibility, we rely on our health partners. So at the point where there's panel, when the referral comes in, we ask for a health partner to support the school's referral and to stay with that child, so that we can make sure that we have a holistic approach to their hopeful recovery. Changes of venue, we have changed venue a couple of times. We're at Pilgrim Street at the moment, and that's been really good in terms of giving us an opportunity to work with other youth teams. And hopefully when we move forward, we'll take all those links to other teams with us. It's also been great for the families of the children, because the children are happy and confident using the Pilgrim site, and often that'll move into them staying at night for some art or whatever groups are on there. So that's been a real success. We're hoping to move to on-site to co-locate with Joseph Paxton, either over the summer or certainly in the autumn term, September or October. So that's something really exciting to look forward to. The current numbers I've touched on before, but in terms of a small breakdown, I don't want to go into too much detail, but I had just glanced down before, we've got 101 children, and we've got a child from every secondary school on the Wirral, including all of the selective schools. So we do, really reach out there. We've got 3 primary age pupils, which is unusual but not unheard of. Maybe a couple more in the pipeline. In terms of breakdown, 34 girls and the rest boys, so slightly more skewed to the boys. And then we've got 4 non-binary pupils. We also take children from the special schools. At the moment, we've got 3 or 4 children who are coming to us from special schools. Obviously, we try not to do all of this on our own. It's so important to treat this as from a holistic view. And we've got some work going on with Web Merseyside, where they're helping us with a group of youngsters trying to build their confidence and their resilience so that they're ready to go back to their schools, which is the ultimate aim. We also send children to Who's for Healing, which has seen some fantastic results. So that's great, making a real big difference. We have no changes to eligibility criteria. It's just that we are flexible with the health partner advice that we get, because we appreciate we're appreciative of the long waiting lists for some of our health colleagues. So we try and take a very pragmatic and child-led and bespoke approach. I also help schools with the graduated response to make it meeting the needs of children with social and emotional needs. It's often very difficult to schools to reach out and change an environment for a child who won't enter that environment. And we appreciate that's difficult, and I spend a lot of time working with schools to get that right. In terms of the budget, the council budget is relatively low. It's 450, and we're managing to bring that in with the supplementary charges from schools, which is working out fine at the moment. Given that I'm the Senko, obviously that puts quite a bit of pressure on the budget if that part isn't right, because like Trish says, a lot of our children are in the wait to have their statutory assessment completed. The 2 learning mentors, as I say, have been invaluable in terms of keeping the children safe and well and happy so that they can learn whilst we're at Pilgrim Street. And then just finally to say that, working alongside other alternative provisions to make sure that we get this right for the children who are sometimes the very most vulnerable. And that's it from me, I think, unless anyone's got any questions.
Do we have any questions for Julie? The last line of the report, it talks about any views in relation to an increase, but I didn't see any increase in.
No, that's fine. It's fine.
Is that okay? And I think we need to express our thanks for all the work you do, Julie, with our most vulnerable students. So thank you very much for that. Is there how's the move going? Is anything getting in the way of that move?
James?
Oh, James.
So obviously, as Julie has shared, our plan is that they will move into the Joseph Paxton campus within the next term. Obviously, from a construction perspective, assets perspective, there's a piece of work to do around some adaptations to meet the needs of those young people. We also currently have the schools library service, which will be moving out of that building. So there's a bit of a sequencing to do. So our plan is, to the best of our ability, within the first half term of autumn term, but we've got contingency in place. And myself and Julie are working with Paul Caldwell from the asset team with backups if needed. But we'll keep everyone fully informed when there's that full move over. And obviously working with Phil Arrowsmith, the head teacher of the hospital school, is closely working with us on this, so that there's that real open conversation around how it's developing moving forward. I suppose the wood reassurance I would give to Julie is this will be the last move. This is the 3rd move in 3 years, so we're hoping this will be the final one.
Is that the last move of the year, or the last move in total?
Me and Julie can't take any more moves, Chair.
And do we have a destination for where the library service is going? We don't get an update from them till the autumn. So yeah. Where will they be based?
We're just working through that. We had a few different options, and we're just in the process of finalising that. So, but I'm happy to share an update with Forum once I've spoken to the asset team. Is that okay?
Brilliant. Thank you for that, James. Okay, Julie, thank you so much for that report.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
If we can move on then now to item number 6, which is the early years working group update, which is James.
Sarah's going to present.
Oh, Sarah, sorry.
Hi,
Apologies.
good evening. That's okay.
Hi,
Hi. My name is Sarah Harper. I'm the Interim Operations Manager for Early Years. Thank you for taking the time to read the Early Years report. Despite being very long, this is only an overview of the support offered to children and families on their journey to statutory school attendance. The report only takes into account social service, council services, health services and early years and childcare providers. However, it is recognised that there are plenty of other professionals involved within the early years system. The report is split into age bands to share the support available to families, particularly from children's centres and health services throughout the critical 1001 days and beyond. It then goes on to detail entitlements available and the support offered. In particular, I'd like to draw the meeting's attention to highlight the new entitlements announced by the Chancellor in March of this year. The entitlements will be changing from April 2024, which will see 2-year-olds with working parents eligible for 15 hours. Then in September 2024, wraparound support for school will begin, and 9-month-old with working parents will be eligible for 15 hours. From September 2025, all children from 9 months with working families will be eligible for 30 hours, and from September 2026, all schools will be expected to offer wraparound childcare. We're still currently awaiting guidance from the DfE as to how this will be delivered. We have had an FAQ, which hasn't really answered many of our questions, unfortunately. We are currently completing a scrutiny of sufficiency in preparation for those new entitlements. That's a very brief overview of the report, so I'll take any questions.
Okay, we have Chris Cook.
Hello there. Yes, thanks very much there. Yes, interesting report. Now it's 0.8.4, I believe. That's right. A very short paragraph there. The last thing you mentioned there, I think it's from September 2025, working parents of children under the age of 5 will be entitled to 30 hours free childcare per week. Get that so far. Whilst many working parents will have always planned to have their children attend childcare, this new offer may mean an increase in demand, which I understand, which could lead to a widening of the attainment gap. So my request really is to make that explicit. What's the link between the increase in demand and the widening of the attainment gap? I've got my own theories and I've got my own political views on this whole thing, what might happen in 2 years' time, no, 2.5 years' time, really. Mm-hmm. But, you know, what's the sort of thinking behind this widening of the attainment gap, really?
I think potentially what we've seen is the current 3 and 4-year-olds 30 hours schools are anecdotally saying that has widened the gap. And there was a report by Pensby School, I think, which highlighted that. I think there will be families who previously may not have been eligible for this entitlement will decide to go back to work or increase their hours or to take up the offer. But there will be families who won't be in a position to be able, or don't feel they're in a position to be able to do that. And so potentially we'll see that gap between families. James?
Just to add into addition there, I think one of the key things around this piece of work, Councillor Cook, is making sure as many families and parents and carers are aware of their eligibility to be able to take provision, that they can access it. And I think there's a big piece of work. And as Sarah said, we're doing a rapid review around sufficiency in the summer term into the autumn term. But then there's a big piece of work for us to do as a local area around identifying those families, initially when the 2-year-old offer comes in, but eventually the 9-month-old offer around parents where both work or single parent where they work more than 16 hours will be eligible. But I think it's one of the challenges and one of the articulations is that the additional 15 hours for 3 and 4-year-olds is available to working parents, whereas it's not available to non-working parents, so they can only access 15 hours. So I think that's the part where you could have that widen the attainment gap. So that's that bit. The other thing I would also touch on, have I covered that appropriately? I think I've. She put a hand down.
Yeah, she put a hand down. I was going to bring her in just then because I assumed she was going to say something along those lines as well.
The other thing that I will just articulate for forum members, and Brad Sarah has touched on this in so much detail, is it's really important that we're aware of the sufficiency challenge we could have, because we could have significant numbers of young people that wouldn't normally have accessed free childcare provision. And I've already spoken to some head teachers. Catherine's on the call from Ganny's Meadow Maintained Nursery School. We know that we may have those parents that are eligible that weren't before that want to access that. So there is a challenge from a sufficiency perspective. The other thing I would share with forum members is one of the things that will happen over the next 2 years is the current size of the early years block is 21 million. Based on the eligibility criteria we think that will be used, and we are awaiting further DfE guidance, I will caveat that. If it's based on the additional 15 hours eligibility of 3 and 4 year olds, if that was then scoped back from 9 months old all the way through for 30 hours, approximately myself and Azako believe the early years block will swell to £40 million for Wirral. Caveat that's an approximate calculation, and obviously we need the detail, but we think it will be in that magnitude of area. So we will see a significant increase in the early years block. And we also can't underestimate the expectation from 2026 of the full wraparound offer for childcare from schools for children that need to access it for working parents. And again, we still don't have the detail around what age profile that would cover. So there's in this space quite a lot of unknowns that we are trying to do sufficiency work on, but it is an area that I think Forum needs to be aware of for the next 12 months. There will be significant work and probably more regular reporting in relation to this specific space. And again, really open engagement with the PVI sector alongside the school sector, because it will be a full system approach to make sure we can meet the needs of young people.
I would comment that previous conversations at Forum in this area have highlighted concerns about recruitment into the area. We had a somewhat extended debate about differential pay in different parts of the sector and how that presents its own problems with recruitments for various parts of the sector. This isn't the first time we've said there isn't enough detail coming out of the centre for us to make informed decisions, but these are significant challenges, and what we do know is that all Forum members will agree that early intervention is a huge help in stopping the gap between advantage and disadvantage impacting later in life. So any help that we can give or any structure we can put in around those early years where intervention is crucial, we need to. But we do need to push the government to give us some detail, because while it may be something we want to happen, with the current funding and levels of funding, I don't think it will be deliverable. And I think that's come through from members of the Forum in previous conversations. I think I've got that right. Is that right, Sarah?
Yes, I'd agree with that. I think the sector definitely feel that the funding is not enough to cover what they provide, and they're currently waiting what the rates will be for the younger children.
James?
Just to touch on it as well, it's in the report that one of the things PVI shared with us at our early years working group was, because of the staffing challenges, they're having to put artificial caps on the number of young people they can take. So where they may have a nursery of 70 places, they're having to cap at 40 or 50 places because they don't have the staff to be able to deliver that offer. So where we may have sufficiency, unless we have the staff, we can't have that many children attending these settings. So it is a challenging space, but we'll make sure we do the work. I hope that addressed your question as well, Councillor Cook.
Well, I was going to say thank you, Sarah, James and Chair, for your combined effort and explain that in great detail. That's great. Thanks a lot.
It remains a real challenge. I think that the early years sector remains a real challenge. Sarah, thank you very much for that report. Any more questions for Sarah before we move on? Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. Okay, the next item on the agenda is a verbal report on high needs. Is that from James?
It is from me. It's just to give an update to Forum members. We met as a high needs working group to just give an update. The main item on the agenda was in relation to the delivering better value piece of work that's taking place. We will touch on this in budget outturn and also budget for the year ahead, but it's really important that Forum members know that the local area will be working with the DfE alongside SIPFA and Newton Europe to do a deep dive into the high needs block. Obviously, you'll be aware with the finance reports that have been shared with you, we have an approximate overspend in our high needs block, our DSG of £4.7 million. Most of that is attributed to the high needs block. That's based on the demand that's coming through the system, that's increased through the number of EHCPs and the demand, the needs of children within Wirral. And because of that, the DFE have asked for us to take part in a deep dive review. The Delivering Better Value review by Newton Europe and SIPFA will take approximately 6 months. So we're just in the process of sharing the data for 5 years of EHCPs with them to do that analysis. There'll be 3 different sections that take place, modules 1, 2, and 3. Initially, it will be looking at the data and the finance. Then it'll be looking at different options available to us and how we can operate to fit within our budget envelope. And then the final phase is around the Wirral local area, putting together a programme and plan around how we fit within our high needs block to deliver what's needed for Wirral's young children in relation to SEND. This will be a significant piece of work. I shared that with the high needs working group. It will take significant resource across children's services, data, finance and project support within the council. But we feel it is the right thing to do to try to get back into that even budget position, but also to share with us some of the ideas that we might not have thought about in the approach that we take about meeting the needs of young people across our mainstream sector, our resource provision, special schools, and where we articulate the use of out of borough. So it will be a significant piece of work. We spent a good section of time for the high needs working group members on Schools Forum, going through what that would look like. And we will be sharing further updates with Schools Forum. There'll be opportunity for head teacher colleagues, wider governor colleagues and the education system to see what that work looks like. And most importantly, when the final report is produced, it will be shared with Schools Forum at the earliest opportunities to articulate what has been found from the Delivering Better Value. It'll also be shared at Children's Committee, with obviously from an education perspective, that links into from a council structures point of view. So that was the main discussion point from a high needs working group. If there's anything I've missed, Chair, happy to cover it. And also I'll turn to Simon to see if I've summarised appropriately the Delivering Better Value, because it is quite a significant piece of work and it's important that Schools Forum are aware of it.
Thank you, James. Absolutely, you have. I think the only other thing that I would add is that we are in tranche 3, which means a number of other authorities in tranche 1 or 2 have gone before. So not only are we hoping to our own work, we're hoping to learn from the best practice that's come out of tranche 1 and tranche 2. And we know that there has been some really good practice models that have been suggested so far. I think some of the concerns initially about this piece of work were around whether or not it was just a cost-saving exercise. But what we've seen so far does look as though it's really focused on what the best needs for children and young people are right across the system and how we achieve that. And as a result of that, achieve best value.
And thank you for that. My only comment would be that the 6 months brings us really tight for budget setting for the next financial year. We've got 2 crucial forum meetings, one on the 21st of November this year, which I think we probably miss with that 6 month deadline, which means we are going to be making some, if there are budget changes in January, which is quite short notice for significant changes. So it's something that I think just we need to be aware of at Forum and keep, if we can get as much update as we can as we go forward. The November meeting's usually crucial for budget setting. James?
I think one of the opportunities that I discussed this with the high needs working group, Simon, is that through this process, obviously there's an ask of LA officers to be involved in this, but we really would want a crucial group of head teachers across the system and governors to be part of that Delivering Better Value, where there may be just a working group that we can give those regular updates. Now, some of them could be forum members, so there's that natural link. So as soon as we get an idea of where the key themes may be, and I think we'll know them in November, Simon, hopefully, that will then be able to link in with budget setting in November. So the offer is there, and if colleagues would like, and I know some of the high needs working group were quite keen to be involved in that, but if anyone else would like to be involved in that piece of work, we'll try to keep the expectation of time to a minimum, but I think having professionals in the room from the education sector will only but help.
And that is not limited to forum members, is it? That is
No, it's open. I just think it might be helpful to have that cross-fertilisation, that there's some forum members and some non-forum members, but it's open to everyone with the education system.
Yeah, if changes in the air, it's best to get those messages out early, because some of those decisions are not done well if they're done in a hurry and can be quite expensive. So let's just keep our eye on that. Any more questions from High Needs? No, brilliant. Okay, thanks everybody. If we can then move on to the fairly brief item 8, which is the forum membership. Whose is that?
That's
item?
me, Chair.
Oh,
And
thank you.
This is a regular report presented to forum. The first table shows the split of membership by groups of when the terms of office are due to expire. There are several vacancies at the moment for academies, and there's also a vacancy for the 16 to 19 representative, but we're currently trying to follow this up. There are also several terms of office coming to an end, but these members will be contacted, and processes will be put into place to fill these places. And the table at the bottom of the report shows the detail. There are 3 new members since the last schools forum. They are John Lawrence, Paula Waring, and Emma Johnson. There are also a few membership changes following the January 2023 census. So the maintained schools membership reduced to 8, and secondary school membership increased to 2. And so the recommendation is to monitor the membership split closely as schools continue to convert to academies. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Angie. Also, a point from me on membership is that there is currently no vice chair, and I think we probably need a vice chair. And for some of the newer members, given that we've had COVID in recent times, there hasn't been much training or opportunity to discuss training for forum members. Is it our intention to move back to face-to-face meetings in the new academic year? I think there was some movement in that direction. James?
Yeah, moving forward, all schools forum meetings in the next academic year, the intention is they'll take place at Birkenhead Town Hall. So there's a change now to the location due to the decision that Wallasey Town Hall is closed for the current municipal year due to regeneration work that's taking place. So that from September, they'll be in Birkenhead Town Hall. And then in relation to training, as a local authority, more than happy to offer a training session with new forum members or any other forum members that like a refresh around structures and systems that take place in relation to that.
So if we can, when we come on, I know this is membership, but when we come on to the work plan, if people feel that they would like to have a training session, maybe directly before the next meeting in the autumn term, we could organise that for maybe a 45-minute training session as we run into the meeting for all new members or any more experienced members who fancy a refresher, if that's something we need to do. But if we can go out to our various representative groups and see if we can try and recruit some more members so that we become full again, that would be great.
Yes, we'll do.
Thank you, Angie. Thank you very much. If we move on then, any more questions on that? Now, if we can move on to item 9, which is the budget update report. Asaka.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can I share the screen, please? Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Is that okay? This is a report to update 2024 budget since it was reported to the forum in January 23. And the school budget for 23-24 has been agreed at the Policy and Resources Committee meeting and by Council in February 23. As reported in January 23-24 budget reflect an in-year deficit of 213,286 to be added to the high need deficit. And I need to apologize, it's section 2.2 here, as the figure quoted was incorrect. It's is showing 3,072,000, but this one is an in-year deficit of 20 to 23. Actual figure, accumulative figure is 4,763,000, and together with 230,000 in-year deficit of 23-24, it's going to be 4.97 million, not the 3.3 million. So I will amend the report and adjust the agenda pack accordingly. And budget change since January meeting, it's primary and secondary budget are adjusted based on the actual individual schools funding allocation. And 127 million has been reduced and for the academic recruitment. And the delegation budget has set up as agreed in January meeting, and the falling roads and growth fund has been identified, which is this year only £70,674. And earlier allocation is split between individual school budget and central schools cost. And PFI holder gap is adjusted to match the council budget, which is funded by the council budget, not the delegate school grant. Further detail is next page 35 in appendix, and it is recommended the school forum note this report. And then any questions, please?
Thank you, Asako. So are we right? Are we putting it in the minutes that this is an errata in the report, so that the budget figures in 2.2 should read 4.76 or thereabouts million?
So this figure 3.072, this one is incorrect, so I will adjust it to 4 million range.
Okay, brilliant.
Okay.
Okay, any more questions for Asaka on the budget report? No? Okay, thank you, Asaka. If we can move then on to number 10, which is also your report. So if we can move on to that would be great. Thank you.
Yes, and agenda item 10, school budget Outturn 2022-23. And this is a report to outline the year-end position for 22-23 school budget. And please note, the account are provisional and subject to audit. Overall, the school budget has overspent by 3,073,000, and together with the brought forward deficit balance, total deficit balance to be carried forward to 23-24 is 4,763,000.
Asako, is it possible for you to use your little plus arrow to expand those numbers? I've had a request to make those figures slightly bigger on the screen. Could you magnify your image slightly?
Is that better?
One more, maybe. That's great. Hopefully that will help. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Right, and I go one by one at the block base, and school block showing 623K underspend. This is due to the in-year academic conversion of 3 schools, and DSG income has been reduced by the corresponding amount. So it's not true underspend. It is. And school, the delegated budget is 74K underspend, which is 13K from the specific contingency, 43K from the maternity and paternity staff cost, and 20K from the insurances. Maternity and paternity rate has been increased for 20-23 budget, reflecting the continuing pressure. However, demand is slightly lower than anticipated. Central school service block is a small overspend of 3,000. Overall high need block overspend is £3,140,753. Pressure from the demand increase for education, health, and care plan ESCP is resulting 931,000. Special education need and top-up budget is overspent by 379,000. And demand for the contingency budget exceeded by 402K. And also independent special school budget is overspent by 1,638,000. 200,000, which the more detail is in the page, 41 and 42 in more details and breakdown of where is that deficit come from. And go back to the main page. Right. And early is on this table showing 800,000 overspend, which is a little bit misleading. And this means only the activity level in the financial year was higher than we budgeted. Earliest funding is based on actual census data, and the budget does not reflect actual grant income. So it's more make it context. Here is the comparison between expected grant income and actual spend. And its actual expected outturn is 276K underspend. And this variance is indicative because earliest grant is not confirmed yet until July. Usually it's a final allocation will be announced in July. It's 276,000 underspend, including 41,922 and underspend of ring-fenced disability access fund. And this fund cumulative surplus is 163,000 for end of 2023. It's which is included in a deficit of DSG reserve. And also demand for the support for early years has continued, and the inclusive practice fund is overspent by 54K. And this is after 225,000 expenditure was met by the budget funded by the high need block budget. And so this is early years and sorry. And the last one is school block DSG grant income. As I mentioned previously, it's totally 462,910 more than budgeted, which is based on academic conversion recoupment, which is matched with the school's block underspend. And early years adjustment slightly more than early years overspend, and small amount of high need recoupment, which is 463,000 favorable position. So this is the outturn of 2020-23 of school budget, and then recommended the forum to note the report and financial position of the budget for 2023. And also note 162,531 ring-fenced disability access fund in the reserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Asako. I think we can all see that there's an issue with the high needs. I'll come to you in a second, Chris. The high needs and the out of borough, the independent, are significant factors in that. My understanding is that they are key foci in the best value, improving value survey that the DFE will be working with us on over the next 6 months. So while they are worrying figures, I wonder whether there's anything that Forum can contribute that won't be contributing in that. Chris, can I just pick that up with James before I come back to you? James?
Yeah, I agree, Chair. This will be picked up by the Delivering Better Value. So all those key benchmarks will be picked up and looked at other neighbours that have been through Delivering Better Value already. And as Simone articulated, we're in tranche 3. So there's a significant number, circa 60 local authorities that have already been through that. So we will be able to be benchmarked really against where they're spending money and how they've been recommended to get back within their budget envelope. You are correct, demand has increased, and also the out of borough spend has increased as well, and they're two of the key areas, but that will be picked up, and part of the action plan that's developed will be about where you've got those key overspends, how you bring those back down into a controllable amount so you can fit within your budget envelope, which I think for the high needs block next year, for example, is increasing to circa £60 million. So we have got an increase coming, but we've still got an increase in demand, and that's not going away. So it's about how we fit in that budget envelope. And I think that's why it's important that as many members as possible, as forum and non-forum, are as part of that DBV so they can see the early sights of what the recommendations would be.
Yeah, it is concerning that so much of that deficit is in that high needs block. Sorry, Chris.
Yes. I mean, looking at that table of various items, the early years block 5.1. Of course, most of those figures, when it comes to the grant and the actual spend, and whether it's adverse or it's favourable, are within a reasonable sort of margin of, whatever it is, 1 to 5%. And then you get the Disability Access Fund, which is a massive underspend. And then it goes on point 5.3, I think it is actually. It talks about that underspend of 41.9 thousand, mainly due to slippage in spending plans. Now, somebody looking at that from the outside would say that's a rather sort of weak explanation for why, slippage is a term that's used. You often feel when perhaps somebody hasn't really prioritised something, give much thought to it, and I don't know. I mean, the disabled community might look at that and think that's a bit, shows authorities have been a bit, or schools have been a bit remiss in not spending that money, given inflation and everything else. So, I mean, is there can you expand on what slippage really meant and why it happened, I suppose?
That's a fair question, Chris. That I think that we've had difficulty spending that fund in the past. That's why the cumulative picture is over 100,000. Who wants to take that? James Asako?
I think Sarah might be able to explain better than me, but this is based on the providers and to apply for the fund to use. Is that correct, Sarah?
Okay.
Yeah,
Sarah, sorry, Sarah, I didn't see your hand.
That's okay. You can only receive DAF if you are in receipt of disability living allowance, and we're reliant on parents filling in the forms to get DLA. And whilst we promote it as much as we can, parents with children under 3 aren't accessing that fund as much as they potentially could be. So we're promoting it as much as possible, both DLA and DAF, but the take up is lower than what we're provided funding for.
So this is impossible to spend if people don't apply for it. So if people don't apply, we can't spend it. Is that where we're at, Sarah?
Yeah, basically. We have.
Sorry, Sarah, carry on.
I was just going to say we have used the funding previously to support settings to make themselves more inclusive because we weren't using the funding. We've not looked at that since, but that's potentially something we could use the funding for.
Yep. I was going to share that comment. We are going to look at how it can be used as efficiently as possible because, like Sarah articulated, it is down to what form is filled in. It's quite restricted, Councillor Cook, actually, how you can use DAF. That it's quite clear articulation. It can only be used in a certain way, whereas other funds, there's some freedom in how it's used and how we articulate that based on need. Whereas this one's you have to have the disability living allowance to access the DAF.
Well, thanks for the explanations there.
Yeah, we should make sure that we explore every opportunity to remove as many barriers for those children as possible. But I'm sure we are doing that. Any more questions on the Outturn report? In which case, thank you very much, Sasako. If we can now move on. Oh, sorry, yes. Who's got the hand up? Nobody. Did somebody interrupt there? Did somebody ask?
Sasako said thank you.
Oh, okay.
I'm
on this big speaker thing. It's not great at pointing out Sam. So thank you very much. Okay, if we move on then to item 11, which is the school balances update, which is Sue.
I'm just going to share screen so you can see the tables. nothing. Is anything happening? Can anyone?
Not. I can see a cursor moving on a black screen. So
The machine's been as slow as me today.
It'd be easy if I shared it, Sue, so you could talk to it.
yeah,
Yeah, it's mainly the tables, James. It's just not letting me. No, it's stuck.
Please let me know when you can see it.
This isn't proving very. Yeah, there we go. Oh, we go. We're on.
Okay, that's great.
Ready when you are, Sue.
Right, okay. So for those that don't know me, I'm Sue Ashley. I'm the Traded Services Manager for the Financial Support Service. And this is a regular report advising the Schools Forum of the overall balances as at the 31st of March 2023 and actions required for schools with the deficit budget. So table 1 shows the balances for March 22 and that they've been adjusted for 3 academy conversions who converted during the 22-23 financial year. And therefore, this reduces last year's balances so that we've got a comparison between last year and this year. And what that shows is that
So just hold on a moment. Can whoever's sharing their screen enlarge their screen so we can see those figures more clearly? Just a couple of clicks on your positive. Enlarge it. Just a request there. One more. That's perfect. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt, sir.
Right. Do we need to go back or are we okay?
I think we're okay if you just carry on there, Sue.
Okay. So the balances at the end of the financial year, March 23, are reducing from 16 million down to 13.5 million, so effectively a reduction of 2.5 million over the financial year. 16 schools have ended the year in a deficit position, with the overall value being of those deficits being 2.8 million. 7 of those 7 primary schools have moved into a deficit during the financial year, with 4 remaining in deficit from 21-22. However, there were 2 primary schools and 1 secondary school that were in deficit at the 21-22 financial year that by the end of March 23 were actually back in credit through working through licensed deficits and through the budgeting plans. Period 9, I'm not sure what page we're on now. A period 9, so I think we move down to the back, to the monitoring. A period 9 indications where the balances would continue to drop in future years based on the projections at period 9. In March 23 the final balances, the actuals, were 1.9 million better than anticipated at period 9. So that's where we've got the 11.6 and the actual balances were 13.5. So whenever we're projecting, we tend to project, it tends to be more negative. So they do actually balances tend to be better than expected. The position for the next 2 years will be clear after the budget setting process, which is currently underway. Preparing and monitoring budgets have been tricky over the last 12 months and during the budget setting process, just due to the changes and the utility costs, trying to establish, exact costs. Adrian was talking about that earlier. Pay awards not being finalised or being finalised towards the end of the financial year. The LMS team and the local authority will continue to work with schools to support difficult budgets. We've got a list of sort of like actions that we follow through and keep on top of to ensure that the schools have got support when they are working through deficit budgets. And we'll continue to work with schools who have licensed deficit plans and notices of concern to try and get those schools back into balance as soon as we can. and the reports for noting.
Thank you for that, Sue. So the summary is that the surplus is shrinking.
Yes. But saying
been...
that the surplus, the 16, it was 16.3, but when the 3 academy conversions have been taken off, the 16 million, that was one of the highest balances that we've ever had. So the fact that they've reduced isn't, you know, we might expect it, because 16.3 million was the highest balance that I'm aware of in the whole 21 years I've been in the role. But
it's shrinking now, and that was
it's shrinking now. Yes,
that's because people couldn't spend money during COVID.
It increased. That's when it increased. Yeah, increased because there was quite a lot of savings over COVID. Yeah.
Okay, I've got a number of questions then. So if we can start with Sean.
Chair, thanks, Sue. Just a quick one. I know you said the obviously the further forward projections are, the less accurate they're going to be, and you apply a lot of sort of skepticism and caution in your forecasts, but obviously the trend, you know, so I don't think anyone believes it would be 12 million in deficit by the end of 2025, I think it was, but there's a clear trend there that balances are reducing. I'm just wondering if where James was speaking before about the review into the high needs and the adding better value review, is there anything similar for school budgets, in, you know, either at an LA level or a cost group level or an individual school level, any sort of support that could be provided for schools? I know your team, Sue, obviously providing an invaluable service to schools, but I'm wondering if there's any sort of additional reviews that could kind of tap into other schools and other areas where best practice could be leaned on.
One of the areas that there's sort of quite a lot of information on the DFE website that needs to be reviewed and looked at and shared with the schools, and there are options with it from the DFE where there can be additional support around processes called SRMA. Yeah. Got the right one on that, yeah. So there are other things that can be done other than within the local authority, yes. Right, we've got a few other hands there.
Yeah, I'll go through this. Can I ask, Sue, although the picture changes, I think we would rather have an accurate forecasting picture than one that ended up with a more beneficial process. Is there an issue with our ability to forecast accurately, or are we just a victim of poor information coming out from the centre?
I think at the moment it's quite a lot around poor information coming out of the centre, or not, you know, issues around what you're building in for pay awards and utilities and things like that. It does make it a lot harder at budget monitoring, but also schools tend to be a bit more, they tend to be a bit more cautious about what they are and they're not going to spend. And then at the end of the year, when they haven't spent something, then that's when the balances can increase more than we were expecting, or there were funds that have arrived that we didn't know they were getting. So it is about working together to try and make them as tight as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a real danger in making really negative assumptions, isn't there? Because then people cut staff, and children don't get the service that they're entitled to.
I agree with that, but it's about trying to find that happy medium between something that's too negative and something that's too positive, because we have had the other situations where we've been a bit more positive, and then something's happened in school. I've had to make big decisions because of the opposite way around. So it is just trying to find that happy medium, and it's probably been one of the most difficult budget monitorings at period 9 and budget settings that I've sort of been through over the last few years.
Absolutely, but there isn't. I'm not advocating any sort of profligacy. I'm just thinking a bit more ability to react at a faster level. So I'm going to bring. We've got a number of people with their hands up. So Sue, Councillor Sue Powell-Wild.
Thank you very much, Adrian. You asked my question. Hi, Sue. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, you totally answered my question, asked the question and answered it there. Thank you, Sue. it is about accurate data, and it is about schools managing the budgets. But clearly we were in a position last year where there were significant increases in utilities, cost of living, and it must have been very difficult for the schools. We're now in a position where that's falling quite drastically, and I would expect to see something within the schools, within their budget reviews, on looking at that on a constant rolling basis, where they're looking at reducing those costs significantly, which is obviously going to have an impact, particularly around fuel and transport and heating, lighting, and even food to some degree. And that's all I had to say on that. Thank you very much.
At the moment, all of those costs are still going up, yeah, but just not as much.
Actually, some of those costs are coming down. It's the ability for schools to react in a timely way, rather than at the end of a financial year, that I think the queries around.
The likes of the utility costs, though, that's a contract that's brought in, and compared to last year to this year, those costs will have risen. They're not, because of the way the contract is purchased. I don't think that they will go down until till April 24.
It's
so we do need to keep an eye on those. Yeah,
absolutely need to keep an eye on it. It has never been.
Sorry, Adrian, I didn't catch that then.
No, absolutely, we keep an eye on it. It's never been more challenging. So we've got a number of other people. So Simone.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I would like to start just by saying, and I think people be aware, we've had a quite a large positive school balance overall for a number of years, but this year has been, and the last year have been, more challenging than ever on schools' budgets. I think we've got a much clearer understanding of what's happening in schools where there's a school deficit, because we're working very closely with those schools, doing that piece of work about how to bring them back in. But alongside that, we also see some schools with very large positive balances as well. And I don't think we understand as well as we should do what is going on in those schools, what's appropriate, what we need to do in order to make sure that those schools are managing as proactively as perhaps some of the schools that are in deficit. I'm also concerned at the moment that, you know, we're in a position where a number of schools are either being pushed towards academisation or academising. And I think as a local authority, we need to be much clearer about our thinking about what happens to schools' budgets. We understand when there's a forced academisation where that takes us, but when schools are choosing to academise or it isn't forced, you know, again, we need a much clearer statement or position about what happens to either the negative or the positive budget at that stage. So I think there's quite a big piece of work that we need to do to bring back to the next schools forum around this whole picture of school balances and what the best way of managing it going forward as a whole system. Because the last thing that I want to do ever is to see a school in a large deficit and children, young people not getting the services they need. But also, I would be equally upset if a school was in a huge positive, academised, and that money left Wirral into a multi-academy trust and wasn't spent for the benefit of children in Wirral. So I do think we need to understand a little bit more about what's going on out there and how we support schools and the whole system to balance the budget well.
I absolutely applaud that comment. I think the money that comes in for Wirral children is to be spent on Wirral children at the point of delivery. So I think some investigation of why such large balances are there. And it's also at a time when we are facing a joint union action about the funding that is coming into schools nationally. If you look at the cumulative balance we've got of 14.5 million, it's hard to argue that we're not getting enough money into the system. But I know many of us are struggling. So there is an extended conversation, I think, that is heading our way about those balances. James.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of points to cover there. Sue did touch on this. The question was around schools in a deficit position where there's further work that can be done. It is called an SRMA. It is, the best description is a deep dive into the finances of school, that you get an extremely detailed report that articulates options that are open to you to bring you back into your budget envelope and what the approach could be in relation to staffing, resources, and it's linked to a curriculum-driven model. So there is that available to schools. In relation to supporting schools with that live data and finance information and that opportunity to model. This has actually come through to me through a different route, Chair, from Forum, through our primary heads consultation group that's been shared from a cluster. And I have offered to meet with a head teacher and others from that cluster if they would like around what that could look like, to get that feedback, to see what are the challenges that you're facing. Is there a different model we can use? So I've offered to meet with them. And then the final one, just on relation to the balances, which I think is really important, that we talked on the deficit position of a number of schools, but actually that deficit position is covering 2.8 million. So actually, when you're looking at the community balance where it's 13.5, if you took the 16 deficit schools out and left the remaining 79 in, you would have 15.2 million. 16.2 million. So it would be quite a significant balance if you remove the schools in deficit in the remaining 9 schools. Get my maths right, apologies. I was a maths teacher in a previous life.
You obviously had a better calculator in those days. Yeah, there is a challenge there, and I think the principle should be that money is there for Wirral children and should be used for Wirral children. One of the things that you alluded to is the ability of schools to be nimble in a changing environment. I think that's something that came to me through the primary heads as well. So I appreciate you taking the time to speak to that associate. John.
Hi, thanks. I think James has already just picked up on this. I represent Wallasey cluster and Wallasey heads. One of the things that's coming through in terms of all the head teachers within that cluster is the ability to track the budget in real time. So some of those schools are actually spending extra money on other pieces of software in order to be more resilient, as you say, more reactive to things. And I'm just wondering whether it's a forum issue, maybe to look at something going forward which makes schools all in Wirral a little bit more forensic, a little bit more accurate in their budget management, and whether or not that's something worth taking forward. I think James has touched on it there, but I do think it's kind of an important issue, and it was very strongly I came with a very strong mission from that cluster in order to raise this at forum.
James, are you going to respond to that?
Yeah, just to come back.
If I pushed you up the queue there, but I think that's a direct question to you, James.
Thanks for that, John. And it was, I did get it through a different route, obviously through primary heads consultation feedback. So I've offered to meet with a head teacher from that cluster. I'm happy to meet with more head teachers from that cluster. But out of that scoping activity and discussion as to what the challenges are and what options are available, I'm happy then to take that to primary heads consultation group, but also bring that to schools forum so it can be a wider agenda item. But as it was raised with your cluster, and apologies for answering your question before you asked it, but I'm happy to pick that up with yourself and also that head teacher that I've offered to meet with, but also a wider audience as well. So completely understand where you're coming from, and we have to try and support schools to be as nimble and agile on a day-to-day basis to be able to manage their budget. So I completely get where you're coming from, and happy to have that dialogue outside the meeting, but also come back to schools forum so it is in the forum agenda.
Yeah, I would say that if this is something that affects budget setting, and if it's something that we can have the family of schools using the same model, then we can work together to train people on budget monitoring. And I think that would be something that would come through forum if that's going to be an agreement for maintain schools to do something to work together as a piece of work. So if we can pick that up in the autumn term, that would be great. Is that okay with you, John? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, Lisa?
Yes, thanks, Adrian. 2 points really. Speaking as an academy representative and an academy head teacher, for us, one of the biggest challenges around our budget setting is what assumptions we're using in actually setting that 3-year budget that we're required to set for the ESFA each year. Forgive me if I should know this, but in terms of the local authority school or maintained schools budget setting, is there a published set of assumptions that are used? Because clearly one of the most contentious issues for us at the moment in our budget forecasting is around teachers' pay award and what that looks like, and whether or not any of that will be funded. So how is that done at local authority level? Because that has a huge impact on what that forecast looks like.
We do get a set of assumptions. However, there are a couple of different models in maintained schools because some schools are cash managed and some are not. Sue, do you want to answer that?
So I provide information to schools as a traded service. So I provide it to the schools who purchase our service. So we would make assumptions, but I must admit it's something I've been thinking about more about whether we need to be putting something together. I know that we budget at different times, but that we possibly do need to put something together that we look at for the whole of Wirral, and this has come about because I've been talking to academy trusts, that are taking on schools currently, and sort of like there's been discussions around what they're building and what we're building in. So I think it's possibly some scope to put more in place that sort of supports everybody, not just me providing it as a traded service to the schools that buy into my service.
Thank you.
So, Lisa, how can we move that forward with some pace? I think what we really need to do is use similar assumptions for the whole of Wirral schools, don't we? Otherwise, we're in danger of setting budgets based on different parameters, and there is a danger in that. So,
it has been quite difficult this year, Adrian, because some of our assumptions have changed as we've been going through the budget setting process because certain things have changed. So, but I think it's something that we need to sort of work through and have something as a working document.
But can we get some pace into how we're going to get the mechanism of that, even if we don't know the details yet? Can we have a group that work together on that to get representatives from academy groups and the local authority together to get something resolved before we go into budget setting next year? So budget setting next year is between November and January. And I know it's different for academies, but that is a crucial time because that's when school budgets are decided from the centre.
Sorry, can I just come back in? Because the second part of what I wanted to raise was, I'm aware that, again, academies all report directly to the SFA in terms of our 3-year budget forecast returns, and those are done, as you know, in a different time of year. So ours are done in the summer, so they've extended the deadline to August this year, but it's very much follows the academic year. There is a concern around what's reported. Now, obviously, the aim is always to set a balanced budget. In terms of as an authority, do you report overall to the department what the cumulative forecast is? Because my worry is that earlier this year, when pay awards were being discussed, the government kind of came out with this incredible statement that they had found this headroom across schools nationally, and therefore, all schools could afford, or schools could generally afford, a 4% increase in teachers' pay. Now, I haven't spoken to another head teacher colleague who feels that they could afford that 4% increase without additional funding. So what we report centrally influences what is perceived in terms of schools being able to afford things like pay awards. And I'm not suggesting we can answer all of this now, but I think there's some work to be done on what goes back, because if it looks like we've got a favourable position of however many £1 million for our authority schools, every time a positive position is reported either authority or academy level, that's contributing to a picture that the government have that schools have spare money. So no one's going to be brave enough to report a negative position because we're always aiming to balance our budgets. But there's a real catch-22 here, I think, that's impacting what the government perceives schools can do going forwards.
The main information that the department, the DFE receive for the maintained schools is the consistent financial reporting data, which is based on actual data. So at the end of the year, the end of the financial year, that data is transferred into the data that we have for all of the maintained schools is transferred onto the consistent financial reporting data, and that is then fed into the benchmarking website. and I'm assuming that's I'm not aware that the DFE get the information from anywhere else. So it's based on the actuals of the year. However, it does take a fair amount of time because we do consistent financial reporting in July, and then it probably doesn't go on the website, onto the DFE website, till about October, November. So they're always working with data that's behind as well.
You're referring to the argument about the last point where we have a set of balances that are reporting that shows there are £16 million in reserves in school balances, Lisa. Exactly the same argument, which is why there is a piece of work around that. It's a difficult argument to stand up against, isn't it, when we're saying we can't afford these things and there are £16 million in the bank. Right, sorry, Chris Cook.
Right, yeah, I waited a little while before putting my hand up because I thought some of the questions I had in my mind would be answered by successive speakers, and they were, but probably more questions occurred to me in the process of listening to them, so I'll try and keep it as brief as I can. But yeah, so my first question was answered by James, who did a bit of maths. So the 13.5 million overall balance is after you've deducted the 2.8 million deficit. Okay. So I'm a language teacher, but I did do a bit of maths on supply. So I did a quick calculation. So I added 97 primary schools to 30 secondary, got 127, divided that into the 13 point something million and got an average, including the schools in deficit, of £107,000 or £108,000. So that's an average balance credit, isn't it? Okay. So I suppose when you talk about supporting schools in deficit to look into why they're in that deficit position, I'm thinking, hang on, where does that money come from? And is the same sort of a mirror image investigation going into those schools that have got a big positive balance? Because I think you suggested, Chair, possibly imply that there shouldn't be such a big balance because that money should be spent on education now before it all inflates away at 10% a year, So is a similar sort of investigation going on in those schools that have a very high balance? Why aren't you spending this money, sort of thing? And if so, what are the cost implications of running that investigation? And there's just one final thing I'd say, and this is just a comment, really. Again, Chair, you mentioned, and other people have mentioned, family of schools. If it was all one family, you might think, well, let's support the poor relation, and perhaps we could transfer, 15 to 20% of our big balance to the schools that are in deficit and even it out. And yes, we need to look at those schools who are in deficit so they don't make the same mistakes again, assuming they are mistakes. They may have been perhaps too badly served by the calculations that the dedicated schools grant were based on. There is that option too, is that possibility? So there's a few ideas there. If anybody would like to address any of those points that I've made. Cheers.
Thanks for that, Chris. Yeah, I think we'll bring a few people in, but I think there are some recommendations, and I think that there is a recommendation that secondary schools shouldn't carry more than 5% of their income as a surplus in total, and I think it's 8% for primaries. I'm not too sure. James, do you want to answer some of those?
So DFE guidance is 5% reserve for a secondary, 8% reserve for a primary. Just in relation to calculations, Councillor Cook, there's 125 schools on Wirral, of which 92 now are currently maintained by the local authority. The other academies. So currently we've got a net surplus budget of 13.5 million. If you removed the schools in deficit, there would be 79 schools with a balance of 16.3 million. So that's the position of those 79. The other 16 are in deficit. The other 33 schools are academies on Wirral. So obviously academy budgets and reserves are not included in this report because they're separate. This is only for maintained schools. So as the report notes, we can do that work around DFE benchmarking to see where that goes. I think the other thing is just come back on Lisa's point. I think it's a really interesting one. I think from speaking to DFE colleagues, I think it's where they've looked at reserves within trusts. And I know where you might work on a yearly budget basis around what you receive, around whether that's appropriate. I think it's where they've looked at reserves. And so obviously they've looked at academy trusts across the country as to whether they've got those reserves. That's what's being shared with us. I know some academy trusts are in different positions, just like maintained schools. But I think that's where it comes from. Not certain, but I think that's the way they've done it. Thanks, Chair.
So sorry, I was on mute then. Thanks. We do have Sean. Another question.
No, I put my hand down, Adrian, because my question was answered.
Oh, excellent. Right, sorry, I'm out of Simone.
I just again go back to what I originally said. I think we need a piece of work commissioning from Schools Forum to look at and understand more what the position is around the schools who have a surplus, as well as the schools that have a deficit balance, and what the options are in looking at that. Again, I don't think any of it's straightforward. I know that some of those reserves have been built up over time for lots of different reasons, so we do need to understand it. But I think based on that, if we bring something back to Schools Forums with some options, Schools Forum then could consider and think about what it wants to do to make sure that we're using that money in the most effective way.
Absolutely, and there are a couple of questions in the chat box there, which are schools allowed to roll over the surplus? Technically, yes, as long as there's a plan around the spending. And
they roll over a deficit as well. Don't forget, Adrian.
Absolutely.
So the surface rolls over and the deficit rolls over.
Absolutely. And then the second question is, what happens when a school has 5 or more or 8% surplus? Well, at the moment, that is the question that we're having, because there hasn't been, in my recent memory, anything to do. Nothing's happened when schools have rolled over greater than that, because that has been left for schools to manage. But the situation has become increasingly difficult and challenging on a national level for education. So this is the time to have those sort of more challenging conversations. If there are plans for spending the money, it should be spent on the children who are in education when the money is given, I think, is the tenor of what we've done as a forum going forward. I've got a hand up there, John.
Hi, thanks, Chair. It was just to respond to in terms of the planning going forward. Obviously, there's some falling role within Wirral, and I'm just wondering, has there been a piece of work done that kind of anticipates what the role will be? Because obviously that has an impact on budgets over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. I think that's a piece of work that's worth doing.
I think James put his hand up straight away, so I think that there's an answer coming your way there. James?
The work's already commenced, so we're in phase 2 of our pupil place planning. We started with Birkenhead in phase 1, which was seeing the biggest change in pupil numbers with all those schools. We've done Bromborough, Bebington, Eastham, Spittal. This year, we'll roll out into phase 3 and 4 and 5, which will cover Wallasey, Central Wirral, and eventually to West Wirral. And in the final year, we'll look at secondary schools, because that's when the change in pupil numbers will come into the secondary school system. So within the next 3 years, all schools will have had a pupil planning review that gives them an estimated population size for their school for the next 10 years.
Thank you for that, James. John, do you want to come back on that? Or
no, that's great, thanks. I just think it's quite useful for schools to kind of, before you go into that placement planning, to actually have a bit of an idea, so they can plan as well. So that only supports the local authority in terms of like going forward.
Indeed, thank you, John. And thanks for that, James. Well, that was a detailed debate about schools' budgets, so thank you everybody for that. Has anybody got anything else? In which case we note that report. Thank you, Sue. We like a debate. We move on to the final item on the agenda, which is work plan. So we've already mentioned. Oh, yes, is the answer to that one, Chris. The work plan is now that we meet next on Tuesday, the 26th of September. I take it from what we said before that is going to be at Birkenhead Town Hall with a start date of 5 o'clock. Is that correct? Or are we trying to hope for a 4? We always put it back to get to an external venue. Does anybody feel strongly that they can't do the 5 o'clock? 4 o'clock, I think, is challenging for colleagues in schools. Okay, does anybody feel that would be a good time to maybe do a 4:30 to start some conversation about training for forum reps or for new reps? Or do we want to move that to the Tuesday, the 21st of November meeting. In which case, could we provisionally book into the town hall at 4:30 for a 5 o'clock start, and we can talk about training for forum members? Is that okay? And on the notes that were sent out, can I just point out that Tuesday, the 16th of January is actually in 2024, as are all those subsequent dates. We don't roll back into the previous calendar year. So if those can be noted, that would be excellent. Any comments on that? In which case, we've come to the end of the meeting. I don't think we had any other business. I was not made aware of any other business. We are 9 minutes ahead of schedule, how unusual. Oh, sorry, I've got a note there in the chat box. Sorry, what was that? Oh, okay, we've got an addendum. Can we have a look at that? The attendance for the January meeting in the minutes of the meeting, and Emma and John were appeared. Can they be added onto that, please, Robin? Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. In which case, thank you very much, everybody. I hope you have a lovely evening. Enjoy the sunshine. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
See you later.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.